Now let's practice, not with constructor functions, but with how we can use constructor functions on the front end more aggressively. Okay, so we've got everything set up here so that we can create restaurants on the fly and they get added to this restaurants array. Well, in between pushing to the array, pushing the new restaurant object to the array, let's create another function that we're going to invoke called Populate Html. And we're going to do it with this. Okay, so somehow we want to populate our HTML, our document, with this object that we're creating. That's my objective here. Populate HTML with this. I don't know what this function does yet. I don't know how it does what it does, but I know that I want to somehow see OSHA and Subway and Loud Table in my HTML when a new restaurant object is created. So let's come down here and just get ourselves set up with function populate HTML, and it's going to take some object. Excuse me. And what do I want to do here? I want to take all of the properties of this object, all of the properties of this OSHA object, and somehow represent them in my HTML. So let's go ahead and do that. First thing I'm going to need to do is probably create some elements. So let's do var myDiv equals document dot create element. Excuse me. Document dot create element div. Okay. And then var myH1 equals document dot create element h1. So we have title, number of seats, cuisine, price, and rating. Okay, how about var myH4? That'll be for cuisine. Document dot create element h4. And then var myP equals document dot create element paragraph, and that will be price and rating. We don't need number of seats. I don't think that's necessary for this. Okay, so now let's start putting the pieces together. My div dot append child, my h1, my div dot append child, my h4, my div dot append child, my p. So I've put h1, h4, and p inside of my div. So far so good. Now let's give them some content. My h1 dot inner text equals object, so that's our argument, dot name. My h4 dot inner text equals object dot cuisine. And my p dot inner text equals price plus object dot price plus comma rating plus object dot rating. Okay, so none of this is particularly new. This is all stuff that we've done before, especially with your comment apps. Nothing surprising here. Now, the last thing that we want to do is append this to the HTML, right? So document.body.append child my div. Let's see it. Oh, apparently I have some CSS still firing here. So let me get rid of that. Well, it doesn't look half bad. All right, so we've got our OSHA div, our subway div, and our allow table div. So far, so good. In fact, I'm pretty happy with that. I could theoretically stop there, but I'm going to try to format it a little bit, still all in JavaScript. Okay. Now I'm going to give to my body. Oh no, I'm just going to come in here and create a div with a class of container fluid. And inside that div with a class of container fluid, I'm going to create a div with a class of row. We're going to use some easy bootstrap here. Okay. Now, instead of appending to document.body, I want to add this to the row, the div with the class of row. So let's think about how to target that div with the class of row. How about document.get elements by class name row. Now, what does get elements by class name return? Remember, it returns an array-like collection of HTML elements. I know that there's only one row, but this is still going to return an array, and I can't append objects. I can't append other HTML nodes and elements to an array. I need to specify the first item in that array, which will also be an element. Okay, so that'll work. Let's test it. Okay, so far so good. And look, they're even starting to sit next to each other. So how else can we take advantage of Bootstrap here? Well, my div, let's go ahead and give my div some class names. My div dot class name equals, let's do background dark, text white, padding 5, and then let's use some columns. Let's do column 12 at the smallest screen, column medium 5, and that should do it. Oh, and let's try MX auto for all of them. Okay, so far so good. I think they're too big too soon, but I'm also zoomed in quite a bit. So here's regular size. Okay, so they jump from 12 columns to 5 columns. Let's change this medium to small. I think they're too big too soon. Okay, so 12, 5. All right, that works for me. It's not bad. And let's also give them a little bit of margin to the bottom with MB5. Now this is all one long list of Bootstrap classes, okay? There's no CSS. I'm not doing anything crazy here, but I am able to predictably and automatically style elements which I'm creating on the fly. Okay, so far so good. Then, let's see, let's also give these divs like a minimum height. Okay, so I'm going to select the style property of my div and the min height property of the style property of my div. And let's try 400 pixels. See what that looks like. Let's try 300. It's a little too tall. All right, not bad. Not bad. Now, what's next? How about we put a background image, a unique and dynamically generated background image on each of these restaurant blocks. Okay, so I'm going to look up a picture of OSHA Thai. Perfect. Copy this image address. Now, where do I want to put it, though? Where do I want to put it? We're going to have to jump back for this and add a brand new property to our object, like this dot background image equals background image, new argument. And we're going to need to attach this to our new restaurant object as a string. Okay, so now this is our background image argument here, which is being plugged into the background image property of the object being created by our constructor function. So now I can simply select my div.style.background image equals, don't need a string, object.bgimage. Let's see how that looks. Okay, that's not showing up. Ah, right. So we need to observe the correct format. Just like that. There we go. So now OSHA has a background image. All right, now let's do the same for Subway and Loud Table. Real fast. So at the end of Loud Table, I'm adding on a new argument, a new string, and then Subway Sandwich. It's hard to find a good picture of Subway. Okay. Now let's test. All right, there you go. I mean, we might want to mess with our text a little bit, some more styling we might want to do. One quick one is, I know what I always like to do with my background images is set them to no repeat. And I like to set them to background size of cover. Okay, that made them look a little nicer, and it keeps them from changing their aspect ratio. Except now we're getting a little verbose with all these mydiv.style lines, right? We've got 4 lines of code here. It's a lot. So I'm going to show you a way to condense this, make it a lot easier. And this has nothing to do with constructor functions and everything to do with some smart coding. If you find yourself editing multiple style properties like this on one element, then you want to use a very different approach, but a very useful one. And that is my div.set attribute. This is a method, and set attribute takes 2 arguments. The first argument is the attribute of this element that you want to set, and I want to set a style attribute and I want to set that style attribute equal to, and in here I'm just going to write regular old CSS. It's just like I'm writing an inline style, in fact. That's exactly what this is going to do, what it's going to create. Let's do background repeat, no repeat, background size, cover, and finally background image. Don't be afraid to concatenate inside of a set attribute function like this. No harm, no foul. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of these 4 lines of code and simply use set attribute. Does it change anything? No, it does not. And let's see exactly what this is doing. Okay, you should know exactly how this is doing what it's doing. If you don't, you need to open your inspector and look. You always need to find that out. And the answer is, it is actually creating a style attribute in our HTML. See the style attribute here on our div, and it has the value of min height 300 pixels, background repeat, no repeat, background size, cover, background image, URL, HTTP, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so everything in this second argument of set attribute was plugged into the value of the style attribute. Okay, think about how else we can use set attribute. You can use it to set a class attribute, an ID attribute, a data value attribute, a value attribute, a name attribute, any attribute you can think of, including, for example, an onClick attribute. Any HTML attribute you can think of, you can set with the set attribute function. Okay, let's try that real quick, very quick demonstration, and then that will be it for the week. My div.setAttribute on click. Remove image. It's a new function. Okay, and I'm going to just come down here, function, remove image. I'll do it so that all the divs have all of their images removed. So I reload, everything is good. I click on one of these divs, all of the images disappear. Okay, so the point is, I can easily add an onClick attribute or an onScroll attribute, an onHover attribute. Sorry, not onHover, on mouse over, mouse enter, mouse leave. Any kind of on something event listener, I can add using set attribute. Okay. So hopefully that was helpful. We're going to look at an alternative method for setting event listeners. So rather than using onClick as an HTML attribute, we're going to start looking at more sophisticated event listeners in the future. But for now, you have an idea of how to use constructor functions to create objects on the fly, and you can successfully format them and populate your HTML with these objects in a meaningful way for a user. You could easily create an e-commerce site almost exclusively in JavaScript by using constructor functions. If you really want to challenge yourself, find a way to condense all of these lines of code to to something much, much simpler.